So yeah, I think a lot of these have been covered now, whatever the cases. I have 3 cases to show, but then some of these probably requires a reinforcement. The first case basically here is a 26-year-old male, manual laborer, road traffic accident, pain, swelling, deformity. And these are the points I've just put basically because this is what I expect my resident to inform me when a case comes. So this is basically for the postgraduates that at least this much of information should come with a distal radius fracture, whether any open wounds, any signs of median nerve compression or compartment syndrome, any neurovascular deficit, the adjoining joints, especially shoulder and elbow movements, and any other injuries, in any of the other systems. So if at all somebody would give this much history, then it's easy for us to take care of how the patient would be, because most of these details now come on WhatsApp for us, or pay as our residents call. But I would always insist that this checklist is what they need to talk. So this is the x-rays of this particular patient, which I'm talking of. And I would like the panel to talk about the fracture pattern itself. Anybody would want to take on that? Dhanshekar, how do you want me to do this? I just go presenting, or like?
No, you can discuss.
Anybody in between?
Yeah, you can discuss.
Okay. Yeah.
Dr. Rex, Dr. Venkatesh, Dr. Satish, B.R.J. Satish, all in the panel.
So anybody from the panel or anyone from the audience itself?
Yeah, so I can see that the epilateral X-ray shows there is a...
Yeah, Dr. Bhaskar, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Go ahead, please.
So this fracture of the distal radius, the AP and lateral X-ray shows there is an intra-articular extension, and from the AP view, I can see there's a fracture of the radial styloid, and also seems like there is a volar lunate fragment as well. It's a depressed sort of tight punch fracture.
Okay.
And I'm not sure that there is a fracture of the scaphoid, or that fracture of the radial styloid overlaps with that. But I will have some...
So for you to clarify these, would you like any other kind of X-rays?
Means I would like to go for if I want, I can have a scaphoid view to confirm that fracture scaphoid. The lateral view, I'm not sure, but still I have a high suspicion. And the lateral view, you can see that there is a volar subluxation of the whole carpal bones. There is no widening of the scapholunate space. So I prefer a CT next.
Okay. Yes. So if at all somebody would ask for X-rays, for me at least, I would ask, especially when you have these fractures on the volar corner, I would ask for an oblique view for me to see exactly what's happening in the volar corner and the sigmoid notch. So this is one of it. Or sometimes a traction view would also be good enough if the patient, when you're doing a closed reduction, all these patients do undergo closed reduction and slab, and then they go for the next procedures. So during that time, we sometimes ask for a traction view. Otherwise, as you said, a CT would be good enough. When do you do the CT normally? As in, after what? You straight away send the patients for a CT scan when the patient comes in with the X-rays together, X-ray and CT?
No, the sort of things then I would advise to give a traction and back slap, and then I will get a CT scan.
Yeah, I mean that's a point I exactly wanted to make, that especially for postgraduates, that get a CT done after the closed reduction, or not, because if you just send this patient with the same thing, even your CT would show the same things. So all you want to do in CT is to get hold of all the information of what are the different fragments available. The traction view tells us a lot of times intraoperatively also how these fragments behave with each other. But the CT would definitely give a static image of where these fragments are. And as you said rightly, that after a closed reduction, the CT has to be done. So this is the CT of the patient.
So can we have an input? Can we have an input?
Yes, yes, please.
The X-ray shows the volar. Yeah, the X-ray shows the volar subluxation of the wrist itself. Is it right? Am I right there? If you see the X-ray carefully in lateral view, we can see a volar subluxation of the wrist itself.
Correct. Correct.
Carpal bone and the wrist. It's basically a distal radius with more of a volar butted type kind of injury
Exactly. But
with a
except
quadratus
that,
fragment.
yeah, except
A
that it's
quadratus fragment.
probably the major fragment is on the volar lunate facet. That's all. Yeah.
Yeah,
So the CT
exactly,
would
sir.
show you
Yeah,
that beautifully now, right? As you said,
yeah,
if you see this
exactly.
part, it looks like a Barton's,
Yeah,
but
there
if
is
you
a
see
part.
the axial view, this is the major chunk which is happening here. But as the
Yeah.
first speaker pointed out, again, there is some radial styloid component also, right? So this is what the CT gives us,
Okay,
the
okay. Yeah,
information.
yeah.
Yeah. And
Thank you, sir.
anyway, the 3D CT for me is a more of a fancy thing. I don't get a lot of information except that it looks good to show the patients how their fractures look like. Any views on that for a 3D reconstruction?
Yeah, definitely it helps. No, you have 3D geometry of the fracture. You can go through your mind, how to approach and
Okay.
what are the fragments.
Okay.
Definitely it helps.
Right. Yeah, definitely it would give you a complete picture of the entire geometry of the fracture in that end of the bone. I do agree with that. So always we get it done. Of course, it's of no extra cost for the patient. So my question now is, what is the implant? What will be your approach in this patient? Anybody on that?
Yeah, so I see that mostly, very rarely I have done a dorsal approach. In my practice, only once I have done a dorsal approach plating. So I will always prefer a volar approach here. And with that intra-articular comminution and the fragment, I use locking plate, volar locking plate. I try to catch that lunate fragment. And also there are small avulsion fracture. I will look at the capsule as well. And after fixing the fragment, if there's a torn capsule, so I have to put an anchor. I will prepare myself or with the Ethibond, keep it ready to suture the capsule.
Okay. Any technical difficulties you would anticipate pre-operatively?
Yeah, so there's a depressed fragment, so I need to elevate that. And if there is a bone gap, then I will be able to, but also, having said that, I rarely done a bone graft that primary cases. So I have to look after the medial now, make sure that I don't damage it.
Your approach would be volar, you said. Would it be the classical modified Henrys, or would you modify any of these things?
Yeah, so the modified Henrys. I always, I go through the flexor torpiradialis bed. I open the bed and retract the FCR tendon, and I go through that bed so that I try to avoid damage in radial artery or median nerve.
Okay. Post-operatively, would you expect any kind of complications in this patient?
Yeah, so I will look for like neurovascular damage. So I make sure that the pulse is there and median nerve is intact. There is no numbness or anything like that.
Okay. Later on, late complications?
Late complication, arthritis.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else for any other inputs? Anybody would want to do it differently? Right. As Dr. Muthuswamy said very nicely, that what we need to do is to that lunate fragment. What we need to do is we need to engage that fragment. That is the most important thing here, because that is where the whole corpus is moving out because of that, which basically means I would modify my approach to go directly into that area as compared to probably a modified Henry's approach. I would go more medially for that, because that is where my major chunk of the fragment is, or the fracture is. So probably that is one thing I would change. But otherwise, as it was put nicely, engaging the fragment, elevating the fragment is very, very important for you to get that facet back here. And you have to enhance the fixation, which basically means you need to have something dedicated to that lunate facet fragment. So you need to take care of the fragment, because it's a very important keystone fragment in the entire distal radius. So these are the three principles we need to have: the engaging the fragment, elevating the fragment, enhancing the fixation by whatever means. Now, whatever means, when I say sometimes this radial translation where it is away from the bone, from the sigmoid notch or the distal radial joint is one of the major factors for instability and the amount of the impact of the injury itself. So that is one thing we need to take care of always. So using any of these kind of methods, I use a lot of times I use the raft wires for me to keep that fragment straight there. So that kind of a fixation where this fragment is pushed up here, elevated and held. With later on, I might use any of the plates, whatever it is. But then for me, the key is the rafting technique is a very useful tool in these fragments, especially when it comes more and more distally. And then at the end of the plating, whether you want to remove the wires, these wires, or retain them is up to you. But otherwise, this is one important technique I would like to stress on, where you can use these like the way you would do in the proximal tibia. Use these raft wires, hold them up, and then you can put in the plate. And as I said, enhance basically means go all your way out to stick. If you want, use dedicated screws. Now I put one extra screw here initially to fix this fragment, like almost like a lag screw here. I've used these K wires here, but then I've removed this later on in this patient. But if you see this, at least in your distal part of your locking plates, at least two of these screws should engage these lunate fragment. That's very, very important. Apart from your other screw, which is their dedicated screw for this. Same thing here. So that was the screw put here. When initially we thought it was like almost like a Barton's. And so this would hold on to that very nicely, reduce the whole carpal subluxation here, and then the plate would buttress it here. But again, I stress that at least two screws, whenever possible, should be held there. If I don't get these two screws, sometimes I might retain these K wires here. So those are the things. Complications, what I meant was a lot of times we do this nicely. This is again another case, fixed. I did try to get it two screws here, but there was some small step here. And by 3 months, you see that this is already collapsed here. And this is a very common scenario. You get a lot of these patients when they come back, referred sometimes, where this is kind of sunken here. And these red flags have to, so whenever you have these lunate facet fragments, always follow them up very carefully every 6 weeks and make sure that this doesn't happen. Because if that fragment is less than 15 millimeters, if you have the lunate facet, if you have less than 15 millimeters or greater than 5 mm of initial lunate subsidence, they are at risk of failure even if the Ola plate was initially placed very properly. So that is what the literature says. So you need to be careful with these lunate facet fragments. And Orbe et al. Have very nicely said that this is the Achilles heel of the distal radius fracture fixation. So as I said initially also, this is like the calcar. It's a very thick bone, and if this is damaged here, you have these short radiolunate ligament and long radiolunate ligament. These are the very strong ligaments. As Dr. X was showing about the greater arc injury and lesser arc injuries, this is the last ligaments which are holding the entire carpus. And if this is damaged with the Oler lunate facet like this, there is always a chance of this carpal subluxation. So very, very important that we take care of these and identify this in the early stage when you do the CT scan. So my few learning points are what I go back to what Dr. Devendra was telling, and even Dr. Pari said, X-rays, very, very important to assess your X-rays well. If you look at the X-rays, every time we make a exercise of this to look at the height and inclination, the bone stock, intra-articular or extra-articular, where are the intra-articular components, and what has happened to the articular surface, and the basic simple concept of one joint above, one joint below. Again, Dr. Rex showed the scapholunate instability. So you need to look at the carpal bones above and the distal radial joint below. So those two joints have to be very specifically looked for in all distal radius fracture fixations. Beautifully fixed distal radius with Ola plates, but the patient always come back with ulnar-sided pain. Very, very common because the DRUJ was not looked at. Or sometimes they come with wrist pain as such because the scapholunate instability was not looked at. So that is where our distal radius fails, even though you would have taken very good care of the distal radius fracture itself. So I tell my postgraduates always with the PACS, you don't have to really draw these lines. You just have to mentally look at it, see what's happening with these fragments here, whether the dorsal subluxation, the inclination, the palmar tilt, all these are taken care of. Where are those combinations? And this is the tool we have now, which all of the hospitals have, and we should make best use of it in spite of just having an X-ray itself. The second is we need to realize what is unstable and what is stable. And unstable fractures definitely require better fixation. There are enough people now who would tell, I would fix this with an X-fix or a K-wire or anything. I completely agree that, but whenever we have these unstable situations, we should make sure they become stable. So if you have a dorsal combination like this, more than 50% dorsal to volar, like this, a very bad angulation, dorsal angulation more than 20 degrees, a shortening of more than 1 centimeter, or especially these intra-articular fractures here, fracture patterns, the shear kind of fractures which we just saw, or any carpal kind of dislocation, right? And ulnar styloid base fractures, which probably predicts that there is a DRUJ instability, and of course, severe osteoporosis. The moment you have all these things, it's very, very important that you take care of this with a better fixation. And again, as we initially put it, as CT should be done after close reduction always. Otherwise, you will get the same information as an X-ray. So always do the close reduction and send the patient for X-rays, sort of the CT, so that you know what fragments you want to look at. The third is to know when to use the plate osteosynthesis. So plate basically is for shear kind of fractures, when there's a compression kind of fractures, or when there's a complex kind of fractures with radiocarpal dislocation and things. Here you could use hybrid fixation apart from plate, K-wires and X-fix. Any of these can be used. But bending or avulsion types like pure radial styloid or classic extra-articular Colles kind of fractures can be managed with other methods like K-wires or X-fix. To understand the different plate designs itself, what type of plates you have so much in the market, but you should know that they all basically fall into this extra-articular or juxta-articular, or really juxta-articular, which means just near the rim. So the dedicated rim plates or fragment specific plates, and they come in two types, the fixed angle or a variable angle locking. Now, as I said, I would modify the approach, especially in this patient, probably go a little more medial. So I want to go straight to the lunate facet here. So I would not go to the modified Henry's approach. I would go to the extended FCR approach, which we can go towards the carpal tunnel if I be required to. I might release the carpal tunnel or not, that's a different thing, but definitely this angle here would give me straight access to the volar facet here. And straight away, this is almost at the watershed line, and this is the fragment there. So I've gone all the way there, and that is what it is. You also need to know if there are alternate techniques. This was already discussed. Karthik asked me about the hook plates. So when you have these kind of dedicated kind of plates, make use of them whenever possible. So if you have a lunate facet fragment here, which is a thick bone, that hook will go and nicely sit there, and these prongs will nicely hold on to these fragments. So that is what I was trying to tell. When you have these fragments and you have a plate available, if at all available to you, definitely use them. And so make sure that it's put properly there and it holds it in a better way. The last point, the learning point, successful use of an implant is basically in our hands. Now, again, this, if you see, looks very innocuous here. And then, but the CT showed that there is a volar lunate facet fragment. And this patient absolutely didn't have the finances for a plate. Very few times where we have compromised on that. And I did a K-wire. There was some scapholunate instability here. And I did put a K-wire, elevated this fragment, used it as a joystick, put it here, put this directly here to hold it here. The DRUJ was unstable, so transfixed that. So this was the position at the end of the surgery here. This was 3 months post-op. And at 1 year post-op, this is still holding on well. So absolutely, there's no problem in using any kind of implant you're comfortable with. At the same time, you should know when to use them and how to use them and how to follow these patients. And very early signs of those red flags, if you see, you need to probably revise these. And whenever we counsel these patients, we always tell the complications and make sure that they understand what they're going through. If they insist that they can't afford a plate, and probably you will have to go with the K-wire. I'll stop at this and take any questions. Pause.
Anil, how often you see volar subluxation after the fixation of the distal radius in these type of fractures? Is there any patient who has come back with you with later subluxation?
Yes. I mean, yes, we do see. It's not that everything is perfect. A lot of times, if we have carefully followed them up, we do see some amount of subsidence in this. And the moment we know that these are the ones which do need to be followed regularly. So I would shorten these follow-ups for these patients. So I would call them at 6 weeks, and then again call them at 8 weeks and 12 weeks. So that initial first 3 months is very crucial for me. That is when the subsidence happens. People do have come, and especially as I showed you one X-ray where I put in 2 screws there, I dedicated 2 screws through the plate, but still there was subsidence there. It does happen. I can't give you the percentage, but definitely it happens. And just that, like how you do a close reduction in distal radius and a cast, and how you are supposed to follow them up, same thing, the same principle holds good in these patients.
Anil
So
sir, can I
those
ask you a
dedicated 2 screws, those dedicated 2 screws or a screw that is going through the plate is possible when the chunk is big. Many times you also get very tip avulsions. Even the Palmer lunate facet has got a very like a tip avulsion you get. So in those instances, what is the plate or what is the choice you have made for fixation?
Yeah, I'll show you the next case or the third case possible, but then that is where I can't put in a screws. I might have to use a suture. So the same plate will be held there, but the sutures will go through the plate, and Ethibond suture, any of these, and I would just hold them with the capsule along with that. So these are very distal shear fractures or rim fractures, and or it might be a comminuted fracture, as you said. And the only option for me left would be to take the whole thing as a soft tissue mass and hold them with the sutures.
When do you take the wires out? Now you are fixing this articular fragment, the wire. So normally do you 6 weeks like already say, or do you leave it longer?
Most of the times they come off at the end of the surgery. Most of the times. I just want them till my plate goes in and the rafts, the wires are held there. But yeah, sometimes I might want to leave them there, and generally by 3 weeks I remove them. The DRUJ wire, if it is there, again I remove them at 3 weeks. At the same time, this raft wire will also come off at 3 weeks.
You bury the wire or leave it out?
I keep them out. I don't bury them.
The DRUJ wire, is it necessary to repair the TFCC and come out, or is the wire required? Because many times we have seen that some of these wires also break early. Suppose if the patient is trying to rotate or something, like can break also.
Yeah.
So now we are moving towards the TFCC repairs rather than putting a wire. What is the take on that?
There's a huge amount of literature and controversies there. At the end of the surgery, you have to assess the DRUJ. That is the first point, and see how unstable it is or how stable it is. You assess in all the 3 positions of supination, mid-prone, and pronation, all these positions. And if you have a doubt, as I said about ligament laxity, you check on the opposite side. That is one thing. Now, if there is a lot of instability and there is a doubt about, and it's an ulnar styloid base fracture and any of these kind of things, which point that there might be a TFCC injury, purely depends on the surgeon, his time, and his expertise. So almost literature says from 40 to 90% of these patients have some amount of TFCC injuries, and most of them probably heal well also. So we don't know the natural history of that. Nobody has done a level 1 study to check and compare these things intraoperatively versus the follow-up. Now, 2 thoughts there. A surgeon, an aggressive surgeon might say that I have 20 more minutes I would spend there and then go in and do the TFCC repair. And another group of people might say, I would just transfix the DRUJ in the position of reduction of the DRUJ with a wire and then hold it for 3 weeks and allow the TFCC to heal. And if the patient comes back later symptomatically, maybe after 6 months down the line or 9 months with a ulnar-sided pain, then I would tackle that partial tear or a complete tear of TFCC. So this is the 2 ways where the literature doesn't support you in either ways. It's finally the amount of time you have, the expertise you have, and your OT time you have. The second, one small tip is for the wire breakage. When you put the wire, you can keep it open out both the sides. So as you transfix the wire, again, not to transfix the wire through the joint, it should be proximal to the joint. That is the first thing. Don't put the wire through the sigmoid notch itself. So put it just proximal to it. That is first. Second is keep it at both ends out, so that even if it breaks, you can take it out in one of the sides.
Anil sir, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So most of the time when you have these kind of depression fracture, as you rightly pointed out, the raft principle works very well. So I find it really difficult by putting the locking screw there, because most of the market plates, which you had rightly pointed out, they tend to have a kind of inferior inclination once we lock these screws, distal screws. So I find the variable angle ones very convenient in this point of view. What is your take on that when you want to elevate?
Yeah. I mean, you use that wire to elevate and hold it till you're putting your plate on your screw, right? So as long as there is some amount of place there for your screw to go in easily, then fine. A lot of times the fragment moves once your screw is going in and the wire is hitting it, right? So that is a time your assistant has to take it out a little, withdraw the wire a little, and then you push in the screw. Otherwise, you'll lose your reduction. There'll be a small step again at the end of the surgery. So be careful on that part of it. Yeah.
So do you, to have this step very clear, do you feel the variable angle device is much better in these aspects?
I mean, even your rim plate is variable angle, except that the screw is directed proximally, because the plate itself is going so distal that you don't want it in the this one. But otherwise, your juxtaarticular plates, all of them have the toggle of the 15 degrees on both the sides, so you can use it nicely wherever the wire is not hitting the front.
Thank you, sir.
Dr. Anil,
Sir.
in acute distal radial ulnar dislocations, you do transfixation as you told. Have you ever come across these injuries become chronic distal radial ulnar joint instability and you have to go for ligament reconstruction later?
Yes, sir. I mean, that's what I was telling. They always later come back with ulnar-sided wrist pain. All these, and most of the times it's because of the malunion. It's not probably because of the primary injury itself. A lot of these patients, actually, the instability, what you're talking, the chronic major instabilities are usually most of the time malunions. Or it's a very bad sigmoid notch fracture which was not addressed. So these are the times where we see, because generally a lot of these TFCC injuries heal well. And most of the time, if it's an ulnar styloid base, they're all peripheral injuries where there is a good blood supply there. So they do heal well, unless they have some nagging pain there. Otherwise, whenever I've seen the instability, it's a lot of times associated with malunion and intra-articular extension into the sigmoid notch, which was not addressed initially. And these are the times, yeah, you have to check whether they have instability only or they have gone into arthritis. And based on that, you tailor your management. If it's pure instability, which is disabling the patient, you go for a ligament reconstruction with a graft. Or if it's already going into arthritis, you'll have to talk to the patient about a Kaparji's kind of procedure.
Anil sir, one more question.
Yeah.
Hello.
I can hear you. You have to unmute yourself.
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah,
am I audible? Audible? I'm sorry for as you rightly pointed out, there are incidences where we see even after a beautiful fixation, by the end of around 6 months, the fragment goes for collapse. As you beautifully pointed out, the fragments that are quite a larger size, and this thing, would the first time impaction grafting for this help in any way, or should we straight away the fragments that are larger fit into the criteria? Should we go ahead with straightforward does it have a role in any sense, sir?
Anyway, unfortunately, the literature doesn't tell where you have to do the graft, which of these fractures will have to do the graft, which of these fractures you have to do a TFCC repair. Nobody has told us, or I mean, there's no evidence in the literature. Yeah, so this is what happens. So if you're a surgeon who's aggressive, as I said, I was talking to TD sir about that. If you're an aggressive surgeon, you would go and do a TFCC repair. If you're a surgeon who want to sleep well on that particular night, you might have to put in a bone graft, right? So these are the things which is otherwise we don't really have a solid proof that okay, this lunate facet fragment also requires a bone graft. It's same like a tibial plateau fracture, right? Once the locking plates came, a lot of people stopped doing bone graft for these after elevation, even though there was void below. And that's what I talk to my the knee colleagues. That's what they tell now, right? So when you have a good stable fixation there, we expect a cancellous bone to heal well. That's what is the concept. Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you.
Shall I move on to the next case, Dhansekhar?
Please move on to the next case. Yes.
So this is again a very high energy closed injury in a 34-year-old male, no other injuries. And if you look at this, if you look at the fracture pattern here, it is all coming very, very, very distal. And the lateral view probably is giving the story there that these are the classical rim fractures. And I would probably beg to differ with Dr. Pari here, because these are the ones which really require the CT. For me to show, for us to show exactly what is happening. And this is the general way. You are going to look at the volar fragment here at this point, the dorsal ulnar corner here, and then on this side here, and then come to the radial side. So all of them, plus these depressed or floating intra-articular fragments. And finally, what we talked in the last case here, the teardrop, what we see in the X-rays is because of this volar fragment here. So a axial view would tell you exactly what's happening in a rim fracture when you have very distal fracture. These are very, very subtle fractures, sometimes missed because they're very, very distal. So flexibility in approaches with implants is very paramount, as finally it's an intraoperative decision, what you are using and how you are using them. The same discussion has happened, but then I'm just telling what are the options to catch these kind of fragments after close reduction. You know that there are fragments still waiting there to be held, and that is where you go in for your rim plates, or you want to do an additional plate on the lateral aspect. You want to put in extra screws here, do whatever possible, but make sure that you go and catch them, and at the end of it, you need to get that articular surface back to its position. So this is 6 months later. There is very small step there, but reasonably healing well. We have used 2 different plates here at this point, and that is again 1 year later here, and that's a 2-year follow-up. Good function for this patient. The articular surface is restored, the height is restored, the inclination is restored. He had some pain on the ulnar side. Probably the non-union is giving some pain, but otherwise no major issues with this patient. And that's the lateral view of this. So again, the point I was trying to make earlier was that achieving volar tilt is very difficult in these patients when we have these so many fragments here. All we're trying to achieve is the articular surface reduction here, and we can't get everything back in these patients. Very distal shear fractures or rim fractures. If I can get a neutral position is good enough, but never the dorsal side, the dorsal tilt. But getting it at neutral position is good. We can't really achieve the anatomical palmar tilt in any of these very distal fractures. And we do get these kind of patients. So this is the problem a lot of times when we don't catch those fragments. It looks fine initially, but then later they collapse, completely collapse, taking away the shear, those fragments along with them. And a lot of times when you go into these patients, hardly there's any bone here on the volar surface here, or even the distal part of the articular surface of the radius itself. Absolutely, there won't be anything. They all get resolved, and there will be a lot of fibrous tissue. And this patient, actually, we just opened up this. It was operated outside, was referred to us, and he had severe pain. We had to take off this plate. And what I all did was to get this back here and use a radiolunate, and then entirely sutured the entire fibrous tissue back into the capsule here. We're creating a scaffold here. This is what we could do for this patient here. So the learning points here is the rim fractures. These corners are basically because of these ligament problems. The attachment of these ligaments are very, very vital here. As I said, these short radiolunate ligaments here, the long radiolunate ligament, the radius capitate ligament here, the dorsal capitate ligament, the radial capitate ligament here. So these are the ones which pull these fragments out. And they're the ones which indirectly says that they're the ones which are damaged in these rim fractures here. So this is where watershed line has to be crossed. So Dr. Devendra was telling, yes, we should not cross the watershed line, but this is the situation where you have to cross the watershed line. And the watershed line is basically, and some implants are designed to cross this area, but only thing is they have to be kept under a low profile. So, and that is why your rim plates do come in. And the concept of watershed line is that where you have your pronator quadratus stopping here and the capsule starting off. And there is a transition zone here. And a lot of times we make use of this transition zone, which is a thick fibrous tissue, and you can just elevate it. You don't really have to do the capsulotomy here, but all the way till here. So that is the entire pronator quadratus, and where the tendon of the pronator quadratus is stopping and where the capsule is going off. And that is the junction of your watershed line. And why Dr. Devendra was stressing that not to cross the watershed line is this. That's basically because your plate with the regular plate, this is not a rim plate, your regular locking plate, as it moves more and more towards the distal aspect here, the most important vulnerable structure is your FPL. And the FPL is the one which gets attrition and can go and cause rupture of this. So that's why we advise, or rather everybody advises, that not to cross the watershed line. But yes, if you have a dedicated plate like this now, which is completely low profile on this aspect here, and your screws will go now proximally here, angled to that area. This is the nice smooth contour of these rim plates. And then if you have these extensions for ulnar lunate facet on the radial styloid, and you can angle your screw into the proximal most part of it rather than the distal, these are the ones which can be used for you to cross the watershed line. So have a dedicated plate, then you can break the rules. And again, the operative approach, modify it as and when required. And that is the fibrous tissue I'm talking of. My forceps is going dipping here, means that is the radiocarpal joint here. This is where the pronator quadratus is ending and the capsule is starting off. And that is the concept of watershed line here. Again, as I told DD sir, that if at all I can't catch those fragments, I might have to use only the sutures. It could be fiber wires or it could be Ethibond, but I would not put the screws, but catch these fragments directly there without this one. So more options. Again, the favorite technique for me would be, again, in these very bad shear fractures, would be to pass in these raft screws, wires, dedicated screw for each of these fragments, and then probably keep them for a longer time in this situation. And that's just a video showing how the watershed line, where it ends and where it starts. And the other thing is the pronator quadratus itself. So all of us, if we take a little more care of this, we can nicely elevate the pronator quadratus in most of the situations. A lot of times the pronator quadratus is lacerated in very high energy traumas, but most situations we can take them off nicely with an L-shaped kind of an incision. Keep a rim of this. If you see, I've kept a rim of this tissue here for me to suture it back later on. But again, if you see a lot of these patients, some have thick pronator quadratus, some have thin pronator quadratus, whatever it is, if you can elevate it nicely here, that is really good. And if you keep this rim here, it's always easy for you to suture it back. And always try to visualize the radial most part, the radial styloid. A lot of our plates always stand out more proximally because we don't expose them completely. And this periosteum with this part here will serve for you to suture them back. The other important thing is this, the lateralization of the fragment itself. And the culprit here is the brachioradialis. And you have to always look at this area here where your fragment is going. I showed the initial thing where I've used an AO clamp to try to address that. So very, very important. That brachioradialis should come off. If it is causing a lot of lateral subluxation, you can't reduce it. So go all the way till the lateral aspect and erase the brachioradialis, and that gives you that corner, radial styloid corner here very nicely, and you can put the plate very nicely here. Very, very important point there. And once you do this, as much as possible, try to close that. That once you put the plate there and you have this rim of tissue left over there, and you also have the tendon and the capsular part here, always try to get that suture there as much as possible and cover this distal edge here, because we don't want that FPL to run over it. A lot of these rim fractures, you have to advise a patient, they might have to undergo early implant removal because they might have FPL attrition. So if you're using the rim plates, in your consent, always talk about this and counsel them and tell them they might require a secondary procedure of removing the plate much early. And this is your FPL here. And if you have covered the plate nicely, when it moves here, there won't be much attrition of this. A lot of times you might not be able to do this if it's a very, very bad fracture and there's a lot of soft tissue damage. But whenever possible, even in your regular cases, which is not rim fractures, try to use the pronator quadratus to cover this. And the last resort sometimes in these rim fractures would be a distraction, which a bridge plating or an internal distraction plate. You fix the fracture as much as possible, and then offload the whole thing with a plate here, these bridge plates, and remove them by about 3 months once, or 3 to 4 months once these fragments have healed. So this is the last part of it. If you want to use a fixator, I am not sure of role of an external fixators. We used to use it earlier, but somebody said it's slowly going off, and we use it probably on the open fractures. Again, I'll stop at this after this case and take questions.
So when do you fix the ulnar styloid? When you have this sort of comminuted distal radius fracture, you have an ulnar styloid fracture as well. So when do you decide that, okay, I'm going to fix the ulnar styloid?
Yeah. So again, I post-op, once I finish the surgery, I would check the DRG instability, and then I would see the ulnar styloid fracture, which is if it's a base fracture and it's completely displaced, I would fix it. But again, 2 points there. One, it should be always an open procedure, not a percutaneous procedure. You should always make a small opening here on the ulnar side. Visualize the dorsal sensory branch of the ulnar nerve, take it away, the ECU, and pull that fragment down to the ulna, and then use your fixation. You can use a K-wire, you can use a small tension band kind of a construct, but it should be under vision because it's an avulsion fracture and it will never reduce by itself. So you always have to do that. So if you feel it's very unstable and it's a big chunk of ulnar styloid and it is displaced, and that is the time you can go and fix it back.
Sir, your comments on using an external fixator. We know that this is a rim fracture involving the dorsal rim, volar rim, and a Duypens variant of depression along with the comminuted radial styloid nerve. So before fixing with a plate, use an external fixator as a distraction mode, attain whatever the fragments falling in place, then go on to fix internally with a plate. Then remove the fixators after a period of 3 weeks and continue with your plate. What is your comment on it?
Yeah, I always do a traction view before I start my surgery under C-arm. So for me, it tells me what is happening between the fragments. And with the traction we give, which of these fragments are actually falling back, whether my external fixator will work or not is based on how I see that on the C-arm and screen it and see what is happening with the traction view. That itself will tell me whether my external fixator will work or not. Second, I know your point that you want to hold those fragments and then you put in a plate and then take it off later on.
Yes,
correct?
sir.
Yes.
Yes.
But there are enough depressed fragments which none of the external fixators will elevate it. Okay. So if you want to feel safe, yes, intraoperatively, we can use the external fixator. That's what I do sometimes. Hold the fragments, whatever is falling back, elevate those manually through going through the fracture site, intrafocal kind of reduction. That's what it's called. So you can elevate those depressed fragments, the Duypens kind of a fragments, put the plate, right? And then augment it with K-wires and then see whether you can remove the fixator or not. Because you have an additional fixator with its pin tracks and all those problems later for the patient. So if you get a good fixation with your plate and maybe an additional augmentation with K-wires, I think the fixator can come out at the end of the surgery, most of the times. If it is not, if you really want to offload the whole construct, maybe you can keep it for 6 weeks and take off the external fixator.
Thank you.
Excuse me, sir. What is your experience on having a avascular necrosis of these fragments, especially rim fractures, and when you do a double plating?
Sorry to say, we've never come across any of these kind of complications of. It's a very vascular area. So I would even see when we have lunate dislocations, we have not seen a lunate going into AVN for that matter. And there are enough theories for that, where there is a capsular supply and things like that. But distal radius per se, never, because they are very, very vascular tissue there. I've never encountered any of those things. I mean, I understand your
Any trick
concern.
is
There are
there
too many
because yeah, not only that, when you go so close to the rim and elevate the capsule off the fragment, sometimes the fragment is so flimsy, and put and fix it, and maybe it goes in for collapse. We don't know whether it is because of that or
no. Generally, we don't think
of always preserve the capsule.
No, generally we never do a capsulotomy for the rim fractures. We don't touch the capsule as such. We don't do it unless there's a damage, inherent damage there. That's why I showed the slide where I've gone without screws. I've gone through the capsule to anchor the whole thing with the help of a suture itself. Yeah, with the help of fiber wires there.
Yeah, I get the point. Yeah, thank you, sir.
So we have one more case.
How often, sir? Excuse me. Can we have one more question? How often do you do a dorsal plating, sir? What is your absolute indication for a dorsal plate? We find it absolutely, it's a nuisance to do.
No, we do have very good low profile plates now. So we don't have to worry about those old kind of plates which had a lot of complications and other things. You can have small L-shaped plates, can use only for the lunate area, I mean, on the ulnar side rather, or onto the radial side. So you can separate them out and use only a small plate. But as I said earlier also, it's if my major chunk of that bone or the fracture fragment is on the dorsal ulnar aspect, which is also a part of the sigmoid notch, I would use the dorsal plate. Otherwise, most of the time it's the ulnar.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
I'm sure everybody's hungry, so I'll just quickly do the last case. Can you see my screen?
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So this is again a fracture. Would anybody want to read this X-ray? Karthik?
I think I see an X-ray here, PA in lateral view. It's more of a Ola Barton where there's intra-articular fracture with more of Ola Barton, and there is, if I'm not wrong, there is a styloid fragment also, radial and ulnar styloid either, with carpal instability. Of course, there is subluxation and also a little bit of increasing in the scapulonate place. As Anil sir had rightly pointed out, again, the step would be for me to go for a traction view.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I'm happy that
dissociation is there.
Yeah.
Yeah. Very rightly pointed out that. So as I was telling that always look at one joint above and one joint below. The below joint for me here is distal radial ulnar joint. So if you see, this is like almost like a greater arc injury, but then it's come all the way till the ulnar styloid here, as Dr. Rex was showing it very nicely in his X-rays. So we should not miss this component here in these patients. And again, this shows the gap here, the scapholunate gap, and all the other components of this. This is a small dorsal fragment here, but this part is entirely intact here. And this is the close reduction which I was telling. So this is with some amount of traction just when I started the surgery for this patient. So you see these fragments have fallen back nicely. So this is where I decide what my implant would be and what will be the, if at all there's a role for external fixator or anything. And you always have to look at the gap in between the carpus when you give the traction, because a lot of external fixators give so much traction that that's a sure recipe for CRPS if you have distracted it a lot. So this should not exceed more than 2 millimeters or maximum the double of that for you to be safe, and patient should not end up with a lot of stiffness. And this is what is very important. When you screen these patients, it's not just the traction, and you see all these components, a very dynamic kind of a picture you get. So I'm giving traction here. I'm moving the carpus. See, the capitate is trying to come in between. There is a scapholunate kind of instability. This fragment is going down. Can you see that? So when you do this kind of a maneuver before you start your surgery, it gives a lot of see this. The ulnar styloid is staying there. It's not moving too much. It might not require a fixation here. So these are the, and if you see these double shadows, I call them clouds. So if you see that, means there is a lot of community in these fragments. So again, the lateral reasonably well kind of, so that's the traction I'm giving there, and this is what is happening with the fragments there. So a CT gives you a static image of where the fragments are, but a traction view like this will tell me exactly how these fragments are behaving with each other. That's a very important step. So this is the reduction again. I put a plate there, I went in there, I used the raft, and I use the radiolunate wire. Very important for the lunate to be in the central here. So I used it from the dorsal side, put a radiolunate wire here. Okay, then came and put in the scapholunate wire here. So this is very important. Once you stabilize the lunate in the center portion, then you come and put in your scapholunate, then the lunate stays there. Otherwise, you try to put the scapholunate wire directly here. This lunate will keep moving. Your K-wire keeps pushing this lunate here. So make sure that this is transfixed first here, and then only put the scapholunate wire here. Okay, scaphoid has this tendency to flex. So always put another wire here, the scaphocapitate wire here. Otherwise, there'll be a lot of stress on the scapholunate wire itself. So always put this configuration of when you have isolated scapholunate ligament instability, one wire comes here, and the other wire will go into the scaphocapitate here. And then when you screen, it has to move together. So that's very, very important. After you fix this, try to screen them and check what's happening to your lunate. Is it staying neutral like this? And whether the whole construct is moving nicely. Very important. So I put in scapholunate. I fixed the ulnar styloid here. And I've also fixed the distal radial ulnar joint just to offload this K-wire here. I've not put more than one wire with the SS wire, any of those constructs. So I just opened it here and put in this K-wire. And so that's why I put this wire distal to the joint. Here I've bent the wire here. Most of the times, as DD sir was telling, we don't really have this breakage problems. But if you have that concern, keep this wire open at both the ends so that if it gets damaged at this point, you can always pull this wire out. So a fracture like that at the end of it looks like this. So you have taken care of the scapholunate joint, you have taken care of the ulnar styloid, you have taken care of the DROJ apart from the distal radius itself. If you have just fixed only the distal radius and all these are not addressed, patient will always surely come back with a pain in the ulnar side or in the radiocarpal joint here. So that is the point I'm trying to make here. Always look at one joint above and one joint below. Make sure you address all these apart from your distal radius itself. So every distal radius fracture is an intra-articular fracture in that sense, because the distal radius is not a single area here. It's a part of the entire forearm joint. And the other point is always look beyond. Okay, when you have this distal radius, look at these and look at this joint. So that's a very, very important point I want to make there. So the implant is chosen based on the fracture pattern and your expertise. I've showed the X-ray with the lunate facet with the K-wire only. So it all depends on what you want to use. If you use the wrong implants, they always give poor results, and we have this tendency to blame on the implants. Like an external fixator being used for a depressed fracture or a die punch fracture. It will never, whatever distraction we give, it will never elevate those fragments unless you manually elevate it by either joystick method or any of these. Soft tissues, like I showed, the pruritus quadratus, brachioradialis, all those things is very, very important. Intraop radiology, as Dr. Devendra was showing, the tilt views are very, very important. And where the screws have gone, all these are very important before you come out of the procedure itself. Don't forget the distal radial ulnar joint and the radiocarpal joint assessment. And I always feel the surgeon is the most important person. Rather than all these implants, you have the beautiful rim plates, you know, all these locking plates, but then it's you who's using what. That is very, very important. Thank you so much.
Anil, when do you repair the scapholunate ligament primarily, or just you fix it with the K-wire? You forget about the ligament.
Almost never. It's same like the TFCC. I almost never. I would always use it. I would always reduce it and hold it with a K-wire. And sometimes we do arthroscopic reduction of the distal radius fractures, and that is the time I would actually do an arthroscopic assisted reduction of these scapholunate injuries also. So that is one of the times when I would do that, but otherwise never. And arthroscopic assisted reduction, again, we don't do it routinely. Whenever there is time and when it requires some extra care, that is when I do. Otherwise, not a routine procedure. So that is not the message there. But otherwise, never routinely a scapholunate repair as such, unless it was a perilunate kind of a dislocation and those kind of scenarios with distal radius fractures. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Anil. It was extensive coverage of complex distal radius fracture. I request Dr. Nidi sir to summarize and we'll close the discussion.
Anil, thank you very much. It has been extensively, you have covered it. The only point that you have to cover is about the elderly, probably because we have talked more about techniques and then how to get it going. We talked about X-rays, stress X-rays, like rather than traction views, tangential views, and then we have most importantly, we have talked about palmar-lunate facet, importance of the palmar-lunate facet. Then the brachioradialis release that is required in fixations. Majority of the topics like this and all we have also discussed. Then need of the bone graft and about the fixation of the inferior radial ulnar joint. All the components that is required for your distal fixation has been covered extensively. Thank you very much. And then I think we all have benefited out of your experience. And then we feel proud that you have participated with us. And then we have had enough share of knowledge, and then we take it home. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you to the Coimbatore Orthopedic Society and all the members for this opportunity, and Dr. Dhanashekhar especially. He wanted, we met in Pondicherry and we decided, he told me that you have these monthly meetings and you should come down to Coimbatore sometime. And Coimbatore has always been a special place for me, especially Ganga. So I readily agreed when he told me that, but unfortunately it's become an online webinar now. It's okay, sometime, some other time.
Yeah, so next time when things settle down, you can come to Coimbatore. We can hear you again once again. Thanks, thank you very much for extensive coverage of all the topics. And thank all the members for logging in. Dr. Bala is there, our president? Is he online? So thank you all for the participation, and thank Dr. TMS sir for bringing the concept of bringing the guest societies, and I think they all would have benefited by logging in today. Thank you all the speakers and presenters. Have a good night. Thank you.